had a chance to look through the State of Crypto report from a16z. This report comes out, I think, annually, and it usually has some interesting stuff in here. And I don't always agree with what they're talking about. One of the things that's in here that was super interesting was the metrics by which they gauge how successful crypto's been. And sometimes this just has a lot to do with graphs and what have you. But one of the things that they put in here was the adoption, the number of transactions, how much people are using DeFi. And it got me thinking a lot about how I use the traditional financial systems and how much, and whether I, as a normal mortal, would gauge the success of something like the US dollar or a lending institution by the number of transactions that happen. And the first thing that caught my eye in the report was they're talking about, well, how do we get more people to do more frequent transactions in crypto, or how do we get them using DeFi more? When I think about the amount of times that I use my credit card, or I use, let's say, a lending facility to go buy a car or a house, I don't think about it as, well, gosh, I need to do more of this. I use it when I need to do it, when I need to buy a bag of apples, or I want to borrow money to buy a car or something like that. I don't think about it the way that A16Z is thinking about it. And I don't think most people would consider these products this way either. So when I think about how successful is crypto been, it leads me to believe that normal people think about it much differently than how AXC is thinking about it. Because I have frequently had the chance to have conversations with a lot of different people, and what I usually hear is people say things like, "I have some Bitcoin," and that to me is the measure of success for Bitcoin, particularly because Bitcoin is a reserve asset. It's the asset that people are holding on to, and they think about it as, well, that's my fallback. Like, I definitely have some Bitcoin, and I know that it can't be taken away from me. And that, I think, is the first killer app for Bitcoin. I said a lot. Lucas, what are your thoughts there?
Well, A16Z, I think that they are going to be stymied by the innovation of Bitcoin. I think you're 100% right, and it is going to be difficult for them to try to take their model of incubating businesses to grow them out, and that has everything to do with if you think about what's actually going on with these notions of incubators and venture capitalism, is that you can go throw some money at a little business and it's going to explode and grow exponentially. But then you turn around and look at Bitcoin, and what's the subtle message behind Bitcoin? That there's a cap in the number of Bitcoin. There's no longer this notion of unlimited growth, and and that begins to change the way that people view the world and their own lives. And so when a SaaS company or some some venture capitalist company is is looking at this, they're going to want to they're going to want to see some company that's figuring out again a way to grow and to explode, to blow up, so they can turn their 45% profit or whatever their expectations are. But I don't think that's going to happen. And or maybe it will happen, but it's going to um, I think it is going to recede, because as we see also people begin to understand the that inflation is not just about rising prices, but about an increase in the money supply, and that's where the rising prices are coming from. We're also going to start looking into the details and beginning to figure out where banking institutions, banks, and finance companies have been standing in the line of that, and how they have been abusing um, ab- abusing, consumers, uh, understanding of what's going on. And
So this is the slide. Let me jump in for a second. So this is the slide in the report that I was referencing, off of just like the title block, image, to get the first thoughts out here. But this one is where it says there's only 5 to 10% of crypto owners that are active users, and this is the thing that struck me. And there's a couple of other points in this deck that I think are worth going to. And I think it's this idea that crypto and Bitcoin are somehow equivalent. I think that there's definitely a differentiation, because Bitcoin has this advantage that it captured the idea of what could be done with a money supply that was different from fiat. So it had like a whole bunch of properties that made it interesting to a subset of people, and then it caught on. It really caught on in a big way, and we're seeing big companies use it as a treasury asset. We're seeing these ETFs. We're seeing all kinds of real institutional penetration by Bitcoin. But what you don't see from these types of institutions is anything other than buying, holding, and then some amount of using it as a financial instrument, like to borrow against, or the things like MicroStrategy is doing, or holding it as a treasury asset of last resort. It's I think that there's famously been, I think it was Charlie Munger or somebody like that, like in the Warren Buffett camp, that says the best assets are the ones that you can always find liquidity in. You don't sell what you want to, you sell what you can when you need to. And that to me is the power of Bitcoin. It is the asset that you can sell when you need to, and it's the asset you can use to leverage to do certain types of lending. And this is something that makes Bitcoin look like you don't use it very much. And that's why I think that this is wrong, because when you try to say how much activity does a specific individual have, I would expect to see it to be low for an asset that is supremely usable. Like in my companies and the companies that I run, I usually say Bitcoin is the last thing we sell. Like you can sell everything else. You can, if you get some crypto, then dump that as fast as you can, because it's probably going to go down in value. But Bitcoin is that thing that we hold on to and we wait. And if we need to, we've always got that. We always are holding on to this last piece that if it comes down to it, we can stand on top of that. And even VC companies in Silicon Valley have been encouraged to think about it the same way. They say you should have at least 1 to 2 payrolls in Bitcoin, because if the bank folds or if you have some sort of a problem with the bank, you can always keep going with the amount of Bitcoin that you have, because it can't stop and it never will stop. And so you always have liquidity, you always have the ability to move it around. So you sit on the Bitcoin and you never really touch it or do anything with it until you have to. And so that's where even guys like, I think John Deaton in his debate with Elizabeth Warren the other day didn't quite get it right, because he still thinks about crypto as an industry, as this big amorphous thing. But then he'll talk about Bitcoin and he doesn't think about the differentiation, because a lot of crypto is trying to carve out some place in the world for themselves. And I don't think that this has been largely successful on a lot of different quote unquote crypto. Whereas Bitcoin has carved out a space for itself in the big financial markets. And it doesn't look like what I think a16z wants it to look like. I think for the very reason that you said, which is they want to get a return, they want to have some kind of an explosive company, but Bitcoin doesn't care about that.
well, and so great points. But when I think about crypto, blockchain, cryptocurrency, I think it's best to think of it as a technology, and to understand that Bitcoin was the innovative breaking wave of that technology. And so yes, it has become a financial asset. And it's one thing to think about Bitcoin as a store of value, but it's another thing to step back from that and say, what happens to a world in which companies and governments no longer have to rely on a third institution supplying trust? And when they begin to take that into their actual model, um, pile on top of that, because pile on top of that this notion of a limited supply, or a growing understanding about the supply versus the price. I think that we've entered a whole new world. And so many of our accepted notions of business for so long have inherently accepted notions of unlimited supply, unlimited resources, unlimited efficiency. That which we call the I don't know, the study, the practice of economics. In many ways, if you get back to it, it goes to some sort of notion of limited supply. And that, I think, is coming to a broader end. We we see that politically in countries who can no longer use the methods of colonialism, um, to increase their markets, or to increase their supply of resources. We see that in companies, in the explosion of I don't know how to put it, in the explosion of financial speculation. Meanwhile, having a diminishing amount of actual differentiation between what companies are bringing. So I think that because and I say, when I say that, like, think about your experience whenever you fly, when you fly commercially somewhere. The reason that, well, one of the many reasons, and there are many, one of the main reasons that it is not an enjoyable experience is because the most of these aviation companies are either relying on on government support, but more so on their ability to sell their jet fuel and to work in futures markets, correlated with fuel. And so they're not concentrated on the experience of the consumer. And then turn around and step back and think about that reliance on financialization, and think about any company that you want to think about anymore. And they've all moved to a reliance on some method of financialization. And uh, that might be Apple's App Store, Google both has the Play Store, but also the ad markets in the revenue for powering the internet. All of our world today is run off of financialization, and the assumption behind all of it is that there will always be more. It's 16Z, and these venture capitalists operate on this notion of sassing out software as a service. And what's the underlying assumption behind that? Well, you can encode it in lines of code, and you can find an unlimited amount of users that blow up your expectation of profit. And that, I don't think, is going to hold true. And Bitcoin works even more so, because it begins, those people who start to buy into Bitcoin and get away from the debt cycle of traditional finance, also begin to question, you know, why do I need to constantly be buying these things? Why, if you can become the financial institution, you can actually get to a point in where you own your house, rather than drawing a loan on your mortgage, or uh, chasing the growing the cost of living that you're bound to when you're operating in the monetary system of the world of fiat.
Well, okay. Let's go back to this thought that I had though. Like I want to hear your thoughts on a specific thing. When I say the primary use of Bitcoin is like this reserve asset that you sell last, this thing that people think about, it's like, well, if all else fails, I still have Bitcoin. Like I can walk out of the country and I could carry some amount of wealth with me if I needed to flee, or as a refugee, if I were to find myself in some place where I didn't want to be, how could I actually have some wealth that somebody couldn't take away from me? I could have a memorized 12-word seed phrase, and I'd be able to at some point, find myself in a technological place where I could get access to some money, and that would be Bitcoin. Do you think that resonates as just like a fundamental idea? As it's wealth that some way is uncapturable, unseizable, that like lives across borders?
Absolutely, absolutely. And but I think there is, yeah, so yes, absolutely. And when I think about this, I actually think about The Money Plot, which was a book that Aleph suggested I read, and I read several months ago. And um, I hate to bring this up too much because it can drive people to sleep, but bear with me. One of the or the main thing of interest I found in the book was an understanding of the difference between finance and money. And in The Money Plot, it talks about money being this notion, because whenever we're talking about money, when we're talking about accounting, we're literally just counting. But money counts from the present and goes into the future. And you can think about that in, say, population. Population goes up, and also being able to count forward and increase uh, increase the mean, or the you know to increase the supply of money as you're going forward is inherent and bound to the notions of things like population and uh, and agricultural surplus, things that actually do occur. But whenever we talk about finance, we go into the future and we count backwards. And whenever our financial system was denominated or correlated to the supply of money, it captured us inside that loop. But Bitcoin, because it has a and this can change, but even the notion or the understanding that it is a law unto itself, and it is a financial accounting. It tells a financial story that gives you a chance to to jump into Bitcoin and step out of the financial loops that are bound inside the money that they ride on. So I think you're 100% right about that, but I think that it is still going to be a more powerful use of the technology of cryptocurrency whenever we begin to apply it to this notion of money and counting forward. So so in some ways, people like to think of the Bitcoin as a replacement of the dollar, of a replacement of money and as money. But if it's just a financial asset and people are only holding on to it, it's not going to take us long to begin to turn back to the technology that's been created and say, oh, I can have Bitcoin and I can have cryptocurrencies that act as monies too. So that's when I'm trying to think about what we're going to see going forward. I think that we understand quite well where the place of Bitcoin is now, and we need to start thinking about what the use or the application of cryptocurrencies is going to look like, and who's going to be creating those monies.
Well, I think Bitcoin fundamentally, due to the way that it's structured right now and its capacity for transactions, means that it is by necessity, by its own limitations, not able to be used as like the thing that replaces your day-to-day spending. I think that it is going to underpin debt. Like we have talked about this in the past, that Bitcoin is going to be that thing that operated more like what Specie did. It's a settlement account. It is the top layer, how everything else will be built upon it. And it's very easy to think about like there being another system whereby that thing has this more traditional look of what we would think spendable currency looks like. Not that Bitcoin can't operate that way, because you can always move it around. You can spend it. It does have a value, and that value can change over time. It goes up, it goes down. but that you would have some sort of an additional thing that rides along with it. Either that's, some kind of a side chain or a drive chain or some kind of a digital currency that lives alongside it. And it's underpinned by this. And it may have a more inflationary, it may have a more traditional look to it, but that it would be backed or underpinned by something that looks more like what Bitcoin is. And I think that the opportunity to try to displace Bitcoin has probably passed. Like it is now entrenched as being this thing. So it lives alongside these other fundamental settlement types like specie. So as we start to think about, well, what is it that underpins the system? It is underpinned by those things which are much harder to subvert. And I think that Bitcoin has a lot of longevity in that it can never have a displacement factor. Whereas something like gold, if they were to actually go get one of those asteroids that are pure gold, and now we have, essentially tripled the amount of gold. That's a very destabilizing and devaluing event that isn't that far off now. I mean, with SpaceX throwing tons of material up into, the upper atmosphere, it doesn't look like we're that far off from a point in time where, things like asteroid mining becomes a reality. Like the more material we get thrown into space, the more likely it is that something like that destabilizes traditional metals markets. But Bitcoin, you can't do that. So it has this longevity into the future that a lot of these other things don't have.
Well, and so this is where again I think we come to the lie of unlimited resources. And in some way the adoption of specie has been the narrative as to what backs or underpins money, and Bitcoin was going to improve on that by not being able to be subverted or thwarted by digging deeper into the world or space travel. But I think that what's really the truth of what underpins debt is notions of forgiveness. And I think that we have that the part of our system today is also carried with the notion that people have to pay their debts, and and I don't think that holds true. I think that we are uh, that we change our understanding of what has occurred in the past, that our feelings don't our feelings don't continue to be hurt, or it's hard for us to actually carry grudges, and that we want to see systems of accounting technologies that help our minds to remember what happened, that understand that nuance. And so I think we come to a point with Bitcoin where the the rules and the ability to see that it can't be subverted are going to mean that people look for other solutions for money, and begin to understand more this difference between money and a financial instrument, because people don't pay their debts. People don't always pay their debts, and the difference between should and must are a political revolution.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I I I hear you on that. But do you think that debt forgiveness is part of like the layer? Because to me, I'm looking at this from a protocol or how is it set up perspective, right? Like I don't even think Bitcoin's really a good place to be doing contract denomination. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. I don't know how many people would really be too excited about saying, I'm going to denominate a contract in Bitcoin where I have a Bitcoin obligation and I'm unsure of my ability to collect Bitcoin to repay that debt. It's like usually you would want to denominate a contract in a thing in which you routinely do business. So unless you're in some sort of a business where you're collecting Bitcoin as a routine operation, I don't think it would be wise, and I wouldn't anticipate very many contracts being denominated in that. But if you look at something like this, right, where it says stable coins have found product market fit in the report. So just going back to the A16Z report, which is something that we've talked about, stable coin being the premier use case of crypto. Stable coins are a digital denomination of uh, fiat, or like the way that we would traditionally think of a spendable currency. And if these have an inflationary component to it, then putting debt into something like this, where you're pretty confident that that debt isn't going to overwhelm you in the long term, makes sense. And it makes sense that you would create some kind of a product that is somewhat inflationary over time, that would have high throughput, and that would be underpinned by Bitcoin. And this is where you would denominate a contract, create the debt obligation, and you could potentially forgive it or whatever, because you're backing that stable coin with something like a Bitcoin. So I think what you're saying would operate at this level, and not at the level of BTC itself.
Well, yes. Um, but I think that there's a whole bunch of people who are going. I think especially there are financial companies, financial institutions that don't understand that, who are looking to Bitcoin as being uh, a a a species that is immune from political interference, so that they can so that they can so that they can press people or their consumers and hold them to their debt obligations, and and that they expect that I mean, what happens when you have a financial institute that's not bound in sovereign currencies? And part of our understanding of the power of or what it means to be sovereign, what it means to be a tyrant, is to be immune from the debt expectations of people outside your sovereign realm, and to be able to forgive the debts of the people who are on that system. You know, the the uh, the furtive placement of the dollar as the denominator of all the world's currencies, and the doublespeak of referring to those still as sovereign currencies, has confused our minds. Uh,
That, I mean, but that's how they sold it, right? I mean, our conversations about what the Bancor was supposed to be, how the U.S. dollar was supposed to operate. I think if you were to harken back to the conversations that were being had, the discussions about how this could work, was that it should work more like Bitcoin, that it wouldn't be something that would be arbitrarily captured, influenced, and used as a weapon and to further the standard of living of a specific set of individuals living within a border. Like, that's the thing that Bitcoin removes, because it's no longer under the control. Now, its distribution might be at issue, who actually holds it, who are the big holders of this, and whether they we got that right. But the idea of how Bitcoin works, being an international settlement layer that countries could use, or that big financial institutions could use, or that major corporations could use, that are free from control and that can't be arbitrarily influenced. Because if you think about Warren Buffett's big cash pile that he's been sitting on, so he's selling Bank of America, he's selling off a whole bunch of assets, whatever he's preparing for getting into the US dollar, he's in a precarious position, because the US dollar can be artificially lost. It can artificially lose its value at the whim of the policymakers who control the money supply. So his, multi-billion dollar hoard that he's sitting on top of, he could lose 20% of it at the whim of the people who control the monetary policy. So that's precarious. But if he holds it in Bitcoin, then he's not subject to that. And I think that that's what France was, very concerned about with what was happening with the U.S. dollar when they tried to call in their debts, and what has happened in times past with the U.S. dollar. And I think that's where this this financial instrument has now achieved that goal.
Well, and so you're right, but I guess I'm just looking forward to saying what happens whenever, whenever so far we've thought of nation states as being the issuers of these currencies, but what happens when Bitcoin gets locked up and um, and becomes out of the reach of consumers, because right now so many consumers and companies that maybe aren't global corporations, the largest of the global corporations, because we haven't seen the likes of them purchasing up until now. I mean, up until the likes of the ETF explosion, and even more so, we're seeing financial companies begin to create this notion of stacked coins, or stacked a currency built on top of the Bitcoin. So I think that, I mean, I think that the Bitcoin has had its impact, I guess I should say, and that what we will see is the likes of not just El Salvador but other countries begin to hold on. But once they realize that they have their own currencies, and do they begin to pay out that Bitcoin, or do they start turning around and forgiving debts, or manipulating the rules of the stable currencies that are of the currencies that are stacked on it? So I don't know. I guess I just feel like the effect of the Bitcoin, that Bitcoin has had its effect, and that we are going to see a second wave of the application of cryptocurrencies, and that companies that begin to understand that and focus more on how they integrate, um, how they become not just a use how they switch from relying on financial arbitrage of a fiat currency, and move to create their own closed systems, or maybe not even closed systems, because the beauty about currency is, or cryptocurrencies, is this notion that people can be voluntarily be stepping into their ecosystems and stepping out.
When I start thinking along those lines, Lucas, I start thinking that the Satoshi will start having a lot more value and importance as the Bitcoin continues to grow. And when you think of that, about the decimal point of the Bitcoin, just, if a country were to have one Bitcoin and then they could break it into the decimal point, that could go a long way. I was talking to Grant a few days ago, and I mentioned, that to make a trillion, it's a million millions. And when you put something in the decimals, you're almost talking about making that large number even super larger, and the amounts that you can break into those decimals into making those something of immense value once Bitcoin starts getting into those hundreds of thousands of dollars per coin, or maybe millions.
Well, but you can only, or maybe we can divide it infinitely, but I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that the stakeholders of Bitcoin are going to that's not going to achieve consensus. Go ahead, Grant.
Well, I'm just pointing out that, like, on this topic of how do I expect to see things shaping up, like, I watch companies like this setting themselves up to create stable coins backed by Bitcoin. This, I think, is exactly how things are going to work. Like, you're going to denominate contracts, debt obligations. These things are going to be done in some sort of a stable coin. I think this idea that it's USD as some sort of pinning for what we're going to see. I think we're going to actually move away from this. I think there's going to be a different type of thing, some other type of currency that will be created backed by Bitcoin, that will have high throughput. It'll look more like what Visa does. It will have some sort of a debt extension, where there are companies which are extending debt to consumers that have known identities, backed by Bitcoin, settled out on some regular basis, like monthly, kind of like what credit cards do, that you can use repeatedly, and that Bitcoin will be the underpinning of that infrastructure and the visibility of Bitcoin. The fact that when we talk about one BTC, it's really 100 million satoshis. That it already is divisible. It already has that underpinning of a small unit of account that is capable, that allows a lot of flexibility within the system. So
what, we're talking all this talk of money and companies. I think, like, stepping back and thinking about the world that we live in, the effects that these notions of unlimited supply, unlimited efficiency, because as we talk about, say, the satoshis, or the fractionalization of a currency, in some ways that's the economic argument about unlimited efficiency. Like, you can break it into ever smaller parts. But we live in a world today where if we want something, we go to Walmart, and there's a plastic thing that costs, we've created all these tools that we use, clothes that we wear that are created in mass. And I don't think that's the world that people want to live in. Once upon a time, like, maybe the 50s, maybe the 20s, there was this notion of, oh, if it was made by a machine, it was better. But that was based on the assumption that the person that the thing that was handmade, or that was created, was of poor quality. I think that
well, did it have more to do with inconsistency? Because I think maybe it was that when you have something that's produced by a machine, whether it's less of quality but it's consistent, right? If the machine can stamp out and what you're getting, and maybe it's not necessarily better, but it, like, that it's disposably cheaper, right? I've got some needle, or I have some widget, and that thing that's pressed out by a machine, it doesn't it's not necessarily better than a handmade one, but the handmade one has some inconsistency to it. Like, I might get a really good one this time, or that guy was drunk the day he made it, and it's not as good. So I think the machine quality one, it sometimes might have had that thought that it's consistently inferior, but you replaceable.
Well, I think there also goes, it's a question of if the person that you made is on equal footing with you, in their class in society, or if they are a lower class, or maybe an upper class. Part of the notion of this machine was making it for you was that was held by a corporation, that a group of people were, in some way, maybe in democratic republics, were an upper class, or standing in for an upper class. But I think part of, if you're a rich person and you have a craftsman that makes you an object, the inconsistencies become part of the narrative of the value of that object. And regardless, like, in the I don't know, the abuse of utility and efficiency that our system has brought us so far, everything's made out of plastic. Like, think about rich people describing the wooden things in their homes. I don't know if you've seen that video on YouTube, but there's great video of, like, rich people saying, and this wood was used in a ship. And that goes to people wanting some sort of authenticity, and to wanting a narrative behind the things in their life. And this is where I think the Bitcoin has already had a profound impact in how people think. Like, all of a sudden, it's not about having more, if the more is made of plastic and compressed particle board. And
Yeah, that's a good point on quality. Just like, what does it mean to want more of something, or do we just want really high quality of a few things that really matter? It definitely resonates with me, because I think about the times when I travel extensively abroad, how much stuff do I really need to have with me? I need to have one really good, reliable laptop, one really good, reliable phone, one really good, reliable set of headphones, a couple of clothes, changes of clothing with an umbrella, something that's weather wicking, a good pair of shoes. It's like once you have that set of stuff, you think about moving around and you say, well, that this is fundamentally the stuff that really matters to me. And then the rest of what I'm doing is access to the financial backing that I've got, the wealth that I have, and my ability to transact and interact with the world around me to rent, buy, or get access to the things that I need as I move throughout the economy. So, yeah,
Well,
I think that resonates.
and then take and think of Dolly Parton's coat of many colors that Mama made for me, and the importance of provenance. Why does art hold value for rich people? In some ways maybe it's about laundering great piles of cash, but in another thing it's about the story of the artist, and that's what's so much more important than the actual visualization. You have a picture that's important to you on your Twitter profile, not because you sit at it and makes you feel good, because it tells a story that's important to you. And this is something that is possible with every item that exists in our lives. But we have relied on the anonymity of coinage systems in our money for so long that it was an ever diminishing number of the uppermost class that could maintain that provenance. But here now we have a technology of decentralized networks that can carry provenance and tell a story about particular items. So in one thing, we talk a lot about the coin side of cryptos, but this is where I also think that NFTs become incredibly powerful. I hate to say NFTs in that regard, but singletons and the ability to tie provenance with a blockchain becomes is I guess the other side of the cryptocurrency coin that becomes even more powerful.
I
So
think and I think A16Z missed that. Like, what is the trend for crypto moving forward? I think it has to be when some company really cracks the nut of digital identity and the ability to create that provenance. I don't think we've seen it yet. I know that there's been a lot of swings at this, but I don't think anybody's really found success and product market fit with it. I just think there's a couple things missing. But I
well,
totally agree with you. But I think we're almost at the top of the hour. I wanted to check one thing, or close to the end of when we would normally stop. And maybe not the top of the hour, but let me just point one thing out. So in this particular point in the A16Z report, I see one troubling front, and I don't know why we're talking about a new wave here when I see downtrend. In a lot of this, it's like I see a lot of activity here, kind of at the peak in 2022. And what I see is some blips of high points, but mostly just downward trend. And I also see just like mostly a downward trend in active developers, funding rounds, search interest. All of this either seems to be flatlining or falling off. I think that's because a lot of things that have been tried in crypto, not Bitcoin, but in crypto, have largely not been successful. Bitcoin has been successful, but a lot of other stuff that's been tried sort of is failed experiments and stuff that people attempted. So if we look at what are the big wins that we've seen in this industry, Bitcoin, big winner. Stable coins, big winner. I think the next thing that's going to come is digital identity and provenance. Like that, if to me, when some company or some set of individuals figures out how to crack that nut on either Bitcoin or whatever other network, I think that that's going to usher in a new wave, because it's going to do exactly what you said. It's going to allow us to finally have some sense of decentralized trust, which is starting to be substantively eroded by AI and generative AI.
oh, I can't believe you just brought up AI and generative AI. We should continue this and have a discussion pick it up with this discussion of expectations of AI at some point. But I enjoyed it today. Sort of talked myself into a corner, but um, I I like the idea at the of thinking about the quality of the items in our lives and thinking about what technology brings and changes with regards to that. And I think that we can start to see some sort of clarity there. And you are right. When somebody cracks that nut of digital identity, then we will see more understanding of what's going on in that area. Anyway, we're way over it now, so I'll see you tomorrow. We'll I don't know what we'll talk about, but I'm sure we'll have fun.
See ya.